Hey, welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. Today is my part 2 of my interview with Jack Radey, the grognard who founded People's Wargames. In the previous episode we talked about how Jack got into wargaming as a kid, and then as he grew up, how he became a designer, then finally a publisher. In this part 2 we'll talk about another topic, politics and wargaming. History and politics are intimately tied together, so when you're making cultural object about history, whether it's a film, whether it's a book, or whether it's a game, it's usually coming with its creator point of view. And there is something we can say about Jack, is that he has strong political views that are tied to also his research work as an historian of the Eastern Front in World War II. Jack is a communist, and I was wondering what kind of impact it had on his career as a designer, but also as a publisher. I was also wondering how he was received in a hobby that is often considered as more conservative. And also, I wanted to have his point of view on the pro-German bias that you can see in World War II games, or at least in their representation. It was especially the case in the 70s and the 80s, but it's also something that you can still see in wargaming today. Unfortunately, as you'll see, the sound quality of that part 2 is not great. I've been hesitant a lot of releasing it, but I think that Jack is making some really interesting points that I wanted to share with the community. So even though it's not as good as I would like it to be, I still thought that it would be interesting for me to share that second part. Did you feel that designing a game on an event actually changed your perspective on that event? So, for example, the design on the Carson Pocket, did it change the perspective that you even had yourself about the event? Or did it just confirm the prior knowledge that you had? Like, is the experience of designing a game on a specific event change your perspective on the history?
Not on Carson Pocket, but I did have a game that I published and had a role in designing. It was Gary Helmer's design, called To the Wolf's Lair, about the 1945 East Prussia campaign. Okay? And historically, this took place just after the Battle of the Bulge. And Churchill sent a telegram to Stalin saying, Joe, I know we didn't exactly come running to your aid in Western Europe, but we're in a bit of trouble just at the moment, and it really would help if you guys could kick the Germans in the butt and distract them from us. Could you maybe do that? And as a result, Stalin ordered the offensive to go in 2 weeks earlier than planned. And Rokossovsky and Zhukov both, I think, write in their memoirs about how, because of this, we had to go without as many heavy tank regiments, without as much artillery ammunition, and as a result, the offensive was more costly and less effective than it might have been. But what the game showed us, which we had not realized, we had an option to go early or to go later, as they historically did. There were a lot of optional modifications of the history in that game you could try. And what we discovered was that if the offensive had waited 2 weeks and the weather had been the same, which it would have been, it would not have made it to the Baltic coast, because the spring thaw would have occurred earlier and would have bogged them down, which in fact it did, but only after they had reached the coast and cut off the Germans. So, in fact, we learned something by looking at the what if and discovering that people say, no, if only we'd done it this way, it would have worked better. No, it wouldn't have. And that was information we got out of the game. And I was tickled to death with that. I thought, this is a use, even though the model has some flaws, this was a useful model for teaching us something about the dynamics. Mission accomplished.
Yes, but that's super interesting. That's a really good example. Now I'm gonna go more into the political part of the discussion. That we've talked about it, but yes, exactly. You have strong political views, and I guess also regarding the USSR. I think that for an American designer, you have iconoclast perception of the events, which I totally support and understand, but I think it's very different. I had a question regarding designs. How did you make sure that it didn't introduce bias in the way you approached the game designs?
Okay. This is the same as my approach to history. I now write history. But I'm a skeptic by nature. And I feel that any story that is too good to be true probably is. Any combat account that describes one side as acting as pop-up targets for the other, they suddenly appear, we shoot them down, they appear, we shoot them down. You know, we don't suffer any losses, of course, because we're so damn good. I don't believe that, okay? I want to find another source. And it's not that I believed everything the Soviets said and nothing the Germans said. I have right behind me that, I'm working on a book on the defense of Moscow in October of 1941. Charles Sharp and I have put out one book on the fighting around Kalinin, and our next book is going to cover Volokholamsk, Mozhaevsk, Narofominsk, and Malaya-Slavets axes. It's going to be a book like that. But I find the only way to understand history is to get as much as you can from both sides and compare them. And everybody lies. Everybody fails to mention the more embarrassing parts of the day's events, would rather talk about the happy parts. Everybody exaggerates the casualties they inflict on the enemy. Everybody tries to minimize their own reverses. There's a good deal of misinformation that's not deliberate, where someone doesn't know, memoirs are full of happy memories, bad timing. No one remembers what day things happened in their memoirs. They're the least reliable in that regard. But by cross-referencing and comparing both sides' accounts, both archival documents, which are now available from the Soviets, and the German, and then as many memoirs and historians' accounts as you can find, and lining them up, sometimes you can find they agree on something. Well, look at that. That's probably fact. Although I found once one case where both sides agreed and both were wrong, and I was able to sort that out. Can I tell you about it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. This is in the fighting north of the Moscow Highway, the ragged right flank of Fifth Army on about the third, fourth week in October. And there was about a third of one rifle division defending an extended front facing west. And they were struck in the flank by 10th Panzer Division and rolled up, chased out of Ruza, and then fled back to the east. Now, they were then, the 10th went wandering off to Skermanovo and got itself in a great mess. But a German infantry division pushed through the area, moving to the east. And once again, they flanked this rump of a division that was defending there and forced them to retreat. But both the Soviet accounts and the German accounts were off by a day, which was odd, that both would be off and both in the same direction. And I was trying, and the reason I found they were off was because subsequent days' reports made clear where they had been the day before, okay? So on the day when they say we're here, in fact, the next day you can tell they weren't here, they were there. Okay, so they started here the next day. All right, what had happened? The Germans were advancing in a roadless area, report that they weren't even able to bring their infantry guns and mortars up with them, nor could they bring their radio, of which they did not have a lot. The Soviet unit lost all contact with its rear and had no radio whatsoever. So both sides were reporting a day late. And the information that's in the documents is what information was received that day. and that the information arrived the next day. So both sides higher commands were out of touch with the actual units and went on what they thought was happening. Okay, so we've done that kind of research. I mean, the first book had 1,800 pages of translation from German and Russian. This one will have about 4,000.
That's huge.
And then you can figure out what is the most likely thing that has happened to explain what's stated here. And Charles and I have enough experience on the subject to be able to do that quite effectively.
Most of the games that were released at the time and are still released today in the Second World War, they look a lot like this. So I don't know if you see. So you see von Manstein with the tanks. It's a great game. Don't get me wrong. I really like the publisher. It's a great publisher. It's a great game. The designer is awesome, but they look like this. Or another example that I think is interesting is this one. So that's the SES. So and it's only
a classic one is Advanced Squad Leader.
Yes, also
the most sold and played war game out there. And what did they choose for their logo? A trooper from the Totenkopf Concentration Camp Guard SS Division. Now, I ask you, of all the possible images you could choose, why that?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, and it's even the case for example, the second one that I show, it's Ardennes, so it's the Battle of the Bulge. It was it's an American game. It's about American army against all odds winning against the Germans, and you still have
by the American army,
and you still have Germans on the box, which is insane, right? It's like, and the thing is, I'm gonna show one of your games just to show the difference to the people watching the interview. So the only game that I have from you is this one, and you can directly see that there is a tiny difference with the other games. First, the box is red and black, which is quite different when it comes to the color, and you have actually a Soviet paratrooper, full size, like in the going through the whole box. And the other games that you have in your that you published were like this. How was it received at the time in the US? We know at least at the time a very right wing or conservative hobby. What was the reception of such games?
Well, it was pretty fun. It worked like this. I made a point of waving a red flag in the game, dedicating it to the men and women of the Red Army who fell, of course, in Shevchenkovsky, fighting to make the world a better place for my kids to grow up in. And I knew that was going to piss off some people, and I really didn't care. I felt it needed to be said. And what happened was, I was also at the time writing a column in the Grenadier magazine, which I called 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock being to the left. And the logo for the column was a alarm clock set at 9 o'clock, wired to some sticks of dynamite. It drew real anger from some people. There's a lot of anti-communists in the wargaming field, no surprise there. And what was even more fun was that some very conservative people in the United States in the wargaming hobby leapt to my defense, furious at people daring to criticize me because they said he's a good designer and he does good and honest research. That's what counts. We don't care what his politics are. The game is not about politics. He's good, leave him alone. I had a letter came to the Grenadier from a guy who described himself as a Reagan Republican, who only knows of two communists. One of them is Angela Davis and the other is Jack Radey. And he's furious because I am the only person in the hobby raising the question of all of these heroic Nazis on the boxes of games. He said, why is it that only a communist is making a stink about that? Why aren't the rest of us? I'll take it. About 10% of my market was seemed to be captains in the armor, U.S. Army captains who served in mostly armored units. I have been invited to the Connections Conference, which was a meeting held at the Air Force Command and Staff School for professional military officers to meet professional wargame designers. And I went wearing my hat with the red star and hammer and sickle on it. And I was blown away. I was invited to bring my unique perspective. I told them I don't want to help the Air Force in any way. And they said, no, you'll be very welcome there, and we want to hear what you have to say. And I thought, okay, you asked. I won't let you down. And every speaker, I had my hand up asking some wise-ass question. And I had colonels run across the very large auditorium with their hand out to shake my hand, saying, thank you. No one has ever asked that question here before. So it hurt my sales. And Fred Helferick, who was editing Fire and Movement when the first review came out, made a point of ambushing me.
Yeah.
Fred famously was a Wehrmacht veteran, served honorably on the Eastern Front, jawohl. And he interviewed me, and it was a decent, he was attacking me, but it was a quite a respectable and decent interview. And then he sent me, after I'd done it, he said, okay, I have one more question, and you got 25 words to answer. What do you think of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan? And I thought, cute, Fred. 25 words, huh? Okay, I said, commissars, forward. I said, look, Lafayette came to the United States to help us with our revolution, brought guns and troops. The Soviets sending troops to help Afghanistan in its revolution, I don't see as all that different. Naturally, I lost sales. Naturally, I had some interesting encounters at conventions. But two guys came up to me at one convention. They were wearing T-shirts that read, boycott communist wargamers. Remember the Khyber Pass. And I looked at him and I said, come here, guys. And they walked over. And I said, what's up with the shirts? They said, oh, it's just a joke. We got a number of your games. We love them, Yeah. I had, basically, I have been surprised and pleased all along at how well I have been received in the hobby.
We talked about the representation of the German army on the game boxes and everything. Why do you think this is the case, or this was the case, at least?
It's as bad inside the boxes as on the covers, too,
Yeah.
Why? Because most people publishing games are publishing games with the intent of making money. And the popular culture in what I call pop history of the Second World War, among many in this country, worships the Germans as the absolute height of military professionalism, effectiveness, and isn't it a damn shame they didn't win? Well, not that, of course, but, against the Soviets, that would have been great. And the reason is because, A, the Soviets never said a word about the war. They put out no useful information for a very long time. Began to, under Khrushchev, tightened up again under Brezhnev, and under Gorbachev finally opened up and let out all the information. But by that time, the story had been told, and it had been told exclusively by the Germans. And for people who've read Guderian, Manstein, von Mellenthin, all this crap, that's how it was. And then historians repeated it all and said, that's how it was. Zeinke, and all of them except Erickson over here. Essentially, the Red Army served as targets for the Germans, And the Germans won and won and won until they were stopped by the mud and then the snow, and mostly Hitler, and that terrible Hitler. He, messed it all up. If he hadn't, he would have been in power in the whole world. Isn't that a shame that it failed? And that the Red Army only won because they had so many soldiers, they kept sending them over, and the Germans kept killing them until the Germans finally ran out of bullets. And then they were trampled to death by the hordes. And it's got nothing to do with any reality. You can tell that just looking at it. No. It can't be that simple and one-sided. War doesn't work like this, and you'll notice they did not win. They lost consistently. They lost in 1941. They lost in 1942. They lost in 1943, and from that on, it was all downhill. So the situation has to be a little different than it's shown. And David Glantz, Colonel David Glantz, our mentor, our sponsor, our patron, and our inspiration, did the job. And he did it from a right-wing frame of mind. He said, what's going on here? All the German accounts, which is all we know, all of the U.S. Army's view of the Red Army is their stumble points. They can't do anything right. And he was at a conference with the Japanese military who asked the U.S., what can you do for us? What can we do for you historically? And the Japanese said, could you research the Soviet campaign in Manchuria in 1945? So Glantz did. And found to his astonishment a highly professional, well-polished, mechanized, combined arms attack that showed the highest level of military competence. And he goes, these two are not the same thing. So if they were this bad in 1941, how did they get here? And two, were they that bad in 1941? So he began researching in the actual Soviet archives, which opened, fortunately, about that time. And his books are dry as hell. They're not easy reading. The subject engulfs me, but they're a slog. But that's because he is totally factual, except for one book, and documents everything because he knows what he's saying is controversial. So he makes a point of saying, I'm not making this up. Here's the proof. And that's what we're doing with our books. I want to push two things, if I may.
Yes.
Horse in Pocket 2 is coming out hopefully this year, maybe early next year. It's nearly done. And for wargamers, I think it will be very enjoyable. It looks a lot better. The rules are much cleaner. And the research is far more refined. The order of battle is, I think we got it absolutely right. Boy, it was a lot of work. I have published a book with Charles Sharp called The Defense of Moscow, 1941, which is actually about the fight for Kalinin. But the publisher said if it doesn't say Moscow in the title, I can't sell it. We are now working on the October 1941 Defense of Moscow, just to the west of Moscow, which will be the definitive book on the field when we get done. And like that.
Yeah, but that's pretty good. So that was actually the conclusion that I wanted to have. So talk about the Carson Pocket 2 and the book that you're about to release. So you did just that. So that's awesome. Thank you very much, Jack, for your time. I hope that you enjoyed that last part of Jack's interview. As I told in the intro, I wanted to release that video earlier, but I was a bit frustrated by the sound quality that I got during the interview. I actually had to cut off some part of the discussion that we had just because it was even hard to listen. So that was a bit frustrated, but I hope that you did enjoy still that second part. Anyway, as you might have seen, I've struggled quite a bit recently to maintain a content schedule on that channel, and I won't make any promise because I'm not sure I could hold them. The only thing that I can tell you is that there are currently 2 videos that have been filmed and that are currently being edited. I'm not sure when they will come, but I know that they will come eventually in the next couple of months. I'll try to see also if I can play with simpler formats, even though I'm not sure it's something that I'm that excited about, so maybe I'll still have a very low schedule, but focusing on bigger videos that I'm more interested in. I also want to take the opportunity of that video to announce that Battles Magazine number 14 is going to be released. In that magazine, there are 2 articles that concerns me and the channel. The first one is the review of supply lines of the American Revolution. So it's a written review that I had a lot of fun writing, and actually if you'd like me to make a video version of that review, please let me know in the comment. And in that magazine number 14, there is also a preview of my upcoming game, Red Flag Over Paris, that I think might be interesting for those of you who have an interest in the Paris Commune and that game in particular. And just for information, Battles Magazine number 14 also comes with a game, as all of the issues of that magazine, and this game is called Storm Over Madrid. So as you might know, it's an area impulse game on the siege of Madrid of 1936, and it looks really interesting. So I definitely recommend that you pre-order the magazine. I will add the link in the description. That's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider liking the video, sharing, and subscribing to my channel. See you soon. This was Homo Ludens.